Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are now 8 days away from the Premier League restarting and kicking back off, giving us plenty of fantasy things to be thinking about. And what a break it's been, to be honest. I've had a lot happening in my personal life. Obviously, a massive shout out first and foremost to all the subscribers and viewers that have messaged me, congratulating me on the arrival of my second child, my son. It's been absolutely fantastic. The paternity leave couldn't have been more perfect as well, with enjoying the World Cup and enjoying my family's company. And of course, with the break in fantasy content meant I pretty much didn't create anything over these past few weeks, meaning my full focus could be on them. So we're now 8 days away. He's nearly a month old already. Can you believe it? It's absolutely crazy. But it's a good time really to start generating that content again. So in this one, we're going to be looking at some World Cup unlimited transfer drafts. I've got 3 that I've put together that I think really are kind of the 3 possible directions that I will go ahead of Monday's deadline next week. Of course, I'll be putting out a few other videos hopefully this week as well to hopefully help you really in any dilemmas, any decision making that you're going to be doing for your team ahead of that deadline. If you're new around here and you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I'd really appreciate you hitting that button. Of course, if you like the content as always, then smash that button below. But let's have a look first of all at the news that broke out very, very recently regarding the double game weeks. I think really this is kind of a key talking point ahead of the drafts that I'm going to put out, because pretty much, these teams will feature in some way, shape or form in a lot of these drafts. So I think really we've got to be talking about it. So first up, it is game week 19 that has been announced as the first double. We have Fulham and Chelsea as the 2 teams that are doubling. I like both of their fixtures, to be honest, even though Chelsea do play Manchester City. It is at Stamford Bridge. So hopefully we'll see a bit of a resurgence really in Chelsea, especially if we're going to go for potentially a double up of their assets. And of course, Fulham as well, Leicester and Chelsea. We know how good Fulham have been at Craven Cottage, and I think even with the World Cup breaking maybe a bit of a flow for some teams, we'll hopefully see some goals there and some return of form for them. So I think Mitrovic, Andreas, and so on are still going to be very, very much in our thoughts for the drafts. That's the first confirmed 100% double game week, which is game week 19. Game week 20 then is Tottenham and Manchester City. It is subject to neither team though playing in a third round FA Cup replay. So in the third round FA Cup fixtures, the close eye will need to be paying attention to these teams. If either of them draw and essentially don't get the job done, or essentially lose in that third round tie, if they do draw, it means a replay will mean this isn't actually a double game week. So Spurs as assets, I'm thinking that they're a possibility really, but with a question mark over the kind of 100% of the double game week, let's say. I don't necessarily feel like we need to load up on their assets too much. And of course, Arsenal and Manchester City are 2 fixtures that, it's the top 2 teams in the Premier League. I think it's going to be a very, very difficult showing for against both of those teams, even though Spurs, of course, are in the top 4 themselves as well. Of course, then Manchester City with United and Tottenham. I still think, United away, you can never underestimate us at Old Trafford. So I think, after the restart, I'm sure Ten Hag is working towards a phenomenal way of taking some points from our neighbours and rivals. And of course, Spurs, even though it's at the Etihad, they're still a formidable side. So I don't necessarily think that this double game week is one that we really need to focus on. I much prefer the fixtures across 19 and 23. And of course, that leads us into game week 23, where Arsenal and Manchester City once again feature as that kind of second double up within the space of that 6 weeks or 7 weeks of returning. So Arsenal playing Brentford at home and Manchester City at home. So I like both those fixtures with them being at home as well. I think that's really, really good. Definitely from an attacking perspective, whether you go budget with Nketiah, with the news of Jesus being injured, or you have Saka, Martinelli, and so on. Even Odegaard, I think to some degree. I think whoever you choose really, with 2 home fixtures against, even though it is, essentially Manchester City in the second game of the double, I still think, a double up of Arsenal would definitely not go amiss in that game week. And then, of course, with Manchester City, they play Villa at home. I do think Unai Emery will be able to essentially convert Villa into a much more formidable side that we know their players are capable of forming, let's say. But I still think at the Etihad, City are going to be a different beast. And maybe that again, a triple up or a double up on Manchester City's attackers, or a defender and an attacker could be on the card. So That's kind of my initial thoughts. Of course, I've got this man underneath me, Erling Haaland. If it does turn out to be game week 20 and 23 that are the double up, I just, to be honest, I can't look past this man as being captaincy choice or just being in our squads. If you were sort of, anyone who sold him ahead of the news that he was out, of course, a couple of weeks before the end of that sort of first half of the season. Yeah, of course, he's going to be a little bit more expensive to bring back in at 12.2 million if you sold him already. But I still think that, as a kind of premium, he is a must-have, especially with the announcement of those double game weeks. So that's kind of where my head's at for the announcement, really, in terms of players to kind of target, or just in general my thoughts about the double game week. They're not really particularly very exciting, but absolutely think that they're still worth thinking about. So we're moving into the draft phase now. So we've got draft number 1 in front of you. I've laid it out a little bit as though I would be playing them as a kind of, this is the team and how I would lay it out if I was to select it or go ahead with this squad. So of course I could have put all 15 on the screen in a slightly different format, but this is just kind of give you a bit more of clarity on where the formation and the structure of the team would look, and we can kind of talk through different weeks where we'd change different things as well. So first of all, in the goalkeeping positions, I've got no other than Kepa and Ward. I think this double up is going to be a very, very popular double up. I think with Kepa's form in the run up towards that World Cup break, I think with these fixtures ahead, even with that double, including the Manchester City fixture, I think that he's a fantastic value pick at 4.5 million as a kind of a slot from that Chelsea defence. Really, I think that Potter is going to be working well to try and solidify them a little bit more. He started off quite well, I think, when he first joined Chelsea, to be honest, and he was keeping clean sheets, and it wasn't very high scoring goals, to be honest, in the games he took charge of. And I think really in this restart against Bournemouth and Forest, don't get me wrong, I definitely think Bournemouth have come out a lot better. Of course, they're under new ownership now. They might have a point to prove, but it is at Stamford Bridge, so I think that's a great fixture to target straight away on the back of the returning game week 17. And then, like I say, the double at 4.5 million, the double game week, I just think that's a tremendous amount of value that we can potentially get from him in goal. And of course, Danny Ward, an absolute phenomenal performance in the second half of that first half of the season. It was just outstanding to see what he done. I think it was like 8 points he scored in the first 9 games or something like that, and then completely turned that on its head. So congratulations to those, of course, that kept faith in him and pretty much had him and Iverson in some of the wildcard drafts that I'd seen. I think he's a no-brainer, really. At 4.1 million, I don't think he's going to be losing his slot to Iverson anytime soon. So I think he's a fantastic goalkeeping option as a backup. And of course, I could go as low as 3.9 if I needed the money. But as you can see underneath me, the squad cost here is 99.8 million. That's if you were to purchase all of these individual players at their purchase price value. So, for example, Trippier is now 5.9 million. Some of us may have bought him at 5.4, 5.5, and so on. So the squad cost will be slightly different to the squad value. This is just the cost to give you an idea that if you were to sell all of your players and you had none of these individuals in, this is how much it would cost you. So I've tried to keep the budget relatively close or under about 101 million, as I think most managers will probably have the value of around this amount of money. So should be an easy team to get to be honest. So they're the 2 keepers. We've then got the defenders of Dalot, Trippier, Cancelo, Ben White and Bueno. So the 3 that I would probably play, at least in the first few weeks, are going to be the combination of Dalot, Trippier and Cancelo. I really don't think we can look past definitely Trippier and Cancelo. I think these 2 individuals are musts in our squads. And you'll notice across pretty much all of my drafts, the defenders are pretty much unchanged. You could say that with the money that I've got personally, and maybe you've got a little bit more my budget to stretch, you could even go with a double up of Chelsea defence and maybe put Reece James instead of someone like Dalot or Ben White. I absolutely don't hate that move, to be honest. I think he's still a fantastic asset. My only concern about him would be the Chelsea rotation, which is why with Dalot, we're still in the market as Man United for a right back. Potentially we do sign someone in January, but I would choose Dalot over Luke Shaw at the exact same price, just because Malacia is already embedded in the United squad and there is a potential risk of rotation on Luke Shaw. So out of the 2 wing backs for Man United, I definitely think that Dalot is the better option at the same price. Trippier and Cancelo, like I say, I think we just need to have them in our squads. I just think both of them a tremendous amount of attacking threat, set pieces, all sorts of different, kind of creativity and delivery, sort of prowess, let's say, from them. And I think that, ultimately they are just the 2 that we cannot argue need to be in our squads ahead of that game week 17 restart. I've then gone with Ben White just because he is the cheapest of Arsenal assets from that defensive point of view. There is maybe a slight concern that Tomiyasu is probably back from injury or maybe getting fit enough to be able to feature. We'll have to see if Ben White kind of loses his place at right back at least. But I honestly think that, the performances he's put in before the World Cup break, I still think he'd be warranted to stay in that position. So I think at 4.6 million, covering that Arsenal defence, I think he's still a great option, even though in this particular week against West Ham, I would potentially use him as a bench option instead. And then, of course, Bueno, we could put a 4 million in, we could put a 4.1 million in. Again, it won't make too much difference, I don't think, to the overall structure of this squad or cost of it, let's say. If we pushed Bueno to a 4.1 million, it would mean that squad cost was exactly 100 million pounds. So I don't think there's any need to necessarily spend that extra money, especially if you want some flexibility later down the line with the money. For my personal budget, I think I've got about 2 million in the bank with this particular draft. So if I wanted to move one of the midfielders to let's say an 8 million, so Martinelli or Rashford, for example, moving them up slightly to an 8 or 9 million, even Darwin maybe to the likes of Kane, that's potentially an option if I needed to make some moves. So I think that using the budget wisely, and essentially Bueno is a playing 3.9 million defender. Of course, Wolves are, kind of in a bit of a nasty area of the Premier League at the moment. I still think you don't want to spend too much money on him. So that's the defenders. That's the 5 defenders we've gone with on this particular draft. And then comes the big hitting midfield and strike force. The 7 heads in front of us here with De Bruyne, Martinelli, Almiron, Rashford, Darwin, Mitrovic and Haaland. I think, the double up on the City attackers, we've already discussed it based on the double game week I've just mentioned. Of course, if they do double in both game week 20 and 23, I think De Bruyne and Haaland as a combination could be very, very promising. I've also seen Haaland and Foden in some drafts. I mean, my personal view is that there is a risk of rotation with Foden. I've already been stung by him a little bit this season, so there's definitely going to be some bias there that he's hurt me. He may not have hurt you. Potentially, he could have done the opposite and scored big for you guys. So I can definitely see why there's some love for him. And I think Pep really should give him the chances and the minutes he deserves as a player. But it's just so questionable with him that I don't think I would take the gamble, especially as it's kind of, it's a reset button. I want to try and get as many people in this team that have as, kind of solidified minutes as possible. So I do like the double up on City. Of course, this takes up 2 premium slots in De Bruyne and Haaland. You can always move De Bruyne to somebody else like the Mo Salah, or move one of the strikers, for example, to Harry Kane, which we'll see in some future drafts on this video. But this is the kind of the double up City Tumium in terms of a draft. Then we go into the kind of more budget midfielders, but essentially offering a tremendous amount of value so far, and essentially what I think is going to be continued through the season, to be honest, from these 3. We've got Martinelli, of course, again, I think with penalties. Saka, I think, is probably going to be taking the most of them, but if Martinelli wins a penalty, there is still question marks on whether Saka gets it if he's on the field, or Martinelli, if he wins the penalty, takes it. So I think at 6.8 million when you buy him, so of course you may already have owned him previously, I still think he's a tremendous asset at that price. Of course, Almiron, another budget midfielder that has outperformed his price tag by an absolute country mile. He was a phenomenal asset to own, and congratulations to those that kept faith in him, or jumped on him essentially as early as those double-digit hauls started occurring, because he absolutely smashed it and was outscoring even the likes of Mo Salah over these past few weeks. So I think he's a phenomenal asset to own. We need to be taking Newcastle seriously and essentially top 4 contenders. And with him, and essentially I think that Trippier as that solid right back, I think he's given Almiron the freedom that he needed. I kind of remember Ryan Fraser doing very, very well in FPL when Eddie Howe was managing Bournemouth, to be honest. Him and Wilson were very, very good to own as a double up a few seasons ago. And I think that Almiron is kind of showing that similar type of, turn of pace, that kind of way of attacking on that right flank, exactly like Ryan Fraser did. Of course, who also features at Newcastle now. But of course, Almiron, I just think he's been unlocked a little bit from Eddie Howe, and I just can't see his form dipping. So I think he's just again one of maybe the non-negotiables of the squad. Going into Marcus Rashford, of course, we've seen what he's done for England with limited amount of minutes in the World Cup. We've seen what he did previously to the World Cup cut-off for Manchester United as well. I still think that he's going to be a preferred attacker for Erik ten Hag. We've obviously got Sancho at the moment that's kind of out. He's in personal problems and fitness issues and all sorts of different things. that Ten Hag's working to rebuild him on. Of course, we've got Garnacho coming through with Elanga maybe falling out of a little bit of favour. But generally speaking, I would say that Rashford is probably going to be part of a front three that includes Martial and Antony, of course, until we potentially sign another striker. So I think that Rashford definitely, for his value as well, with those fixtures for United at Forest, with Wolves, with Bournemouth as well, I think they're great fixtures to target. And at 6.7 million, I can see him doing some real damage, to be honest. Then moving into the strike force here of Darwin, Mitrovic and Haaland. We've got Darwin Núñez, who I think, to be honest, the only downside of Darwin really is his price point is a little bit difficult. It's a bit of a strange kind of area. We don't really have any standout 8 million kind of strikers or 9 million strikers really, other than him and I would say Jesus. Jesus, of course, being out for 3 months. It means that really there's a little bit more money in Darwin than potentially some structures will go for. Potentially there could be someone like, let's say, Callum Wilson in there instead, alongside Mitrovic, or even as low as Nketiah, of course, with the news of Jesus being out as well. But I've just got a feeling that, especially with the news of Jota and of course Diaz being injured for a lot longer than we anticipated, I think he's got guaranteed minutes. There's also the disciplinary question, but I still think in this Liverpool side, there is absolute potential to be able to score a lot of goals, create a lot of opportunities, and I think this man's going to be at the forefront of them. And with those fixtures, Villa, Leicester and Brentford, I think all of those are very, very promising fixtures to target, which is why he features in this squad. Mitrovic, I think really from a double game week perspective, once again, him slotting in there on that game week 19 one against Leicester and Chelsea. Yes, on paper, maybe it's a little bit more difficult than it appears at first, but I genuinely believe that even Andreas will probably come in for me on that game week just because of the set piece threat that he offers as well. I just think having him, he's a penalty taker. I think, he did quite well in the World Cup as well. I think, he's got past any kind of niggly injuries that he was having prior to the World Cup break as well. So I just think that he's going to offer, again, a tremendous amount of value like he did at the beginning of the season. So I can't really look past him, to be honest, especially with that double game week on the horizon. And then, of course, without further ado, that man, Erling Haaland, really, I think he's just a non-negotiable in these drafts. I think that it goes without saying he's an absolute monster. He will still be, I think, as fit as he was when the Premier League suspended itself. I just think it's going to be a phenomenal return for him. And of course, again, as mentioned with De Bruyne, with those double game weeks on the horizon, potentially 2 lots of double game weeks, I think he's going to be a phenomenal asset. So there we go. That's draft number 1. As mentioned, I've not really got too many changes across all of these drafts. It's more about where I'm spending the money in terms of the midfield and the strikers. The defenders and the goalkeepers as well are pretty much, I think, locked in for the most part. Here I don't have to go through all of the justification of every player, of course, or where different players slot in. But what I will mention is this is much more heavy on the premiums, right? We've got a freemium draft here with Mo Salah, Harry Kane and Erling Haaland. That's 3 penalty takers, 3 hard hitting assets. There is maybe a few question marks over Harry Kane with picking up 4 yellow cards. He's still got a couple of matches to play with Spurs before that what gets wiped and the yellow card suspension gets extended to 10 yellow cards as opposed to 5. But he is on yellow card watch, which is maybe the element of risk. But of course, again, with the double game weeks, game week 20, if there is no third round FA Cup replay for either Spurs or City, then they will go ahead and play each other in that game week 20 double game week. So I think that Kane potentially could be an option as well here. You'll notice as well there's another change in the midfield that Somerville replaces Rashford. That was really just to kind of free up a little bit of money. We've actually got, I think, about 1.5 million in the bank personally here to spend. But I just felt that Somerville, from a Leeds perspective, in the last 4 games, this man has scored 4 goals and got 1 assist. I really think that as part of kind of Leeds' resurgence to be able to kick on into this second half of the season and survive another season in the Premier League, I think he potentially could be at the forefront of that survival bid. And I think really at 4.4 million for what he's providing, I wouldn't be playing him probably in at least the first 2 fixtures. But of course, he offers that kind of swap. Let's say when Manchester United play City, I think it's maybe in game week 20 something. You've then got, I think, Ben White as well, of course. Arsenal play City in the double game week of 23. You could potentially play Somerville instead, and I think Leeds have got some favourable fixtures across game week 20 to, let's say, 27 or something like that. So I think that he offers a tremendous amount of value to just kind of swap in when that kind of fourth defender maybe has a bit of a trickier fixture. But you can see that here, there's maybe a slight lack of flexibility in terms of yes, we have a bit of money in the bank. Again, going back to, let's say, someone like Reece James, you could potentially swap Ben White out or Dalot for Reece James if you like the Chelsea double up and you want to target maybe another double game week in that City and Fulham fixture. But I think the balance overall is maybe just slightly off. I think the freemium is possible, as you can see here, but I think we have to sacrifice maybe that little bit of flexibility to keep it. So it's not necessarily my favourite draft, but it's definitely one that I can see a lot of managers going for. And to be honest, why not? Like I say, you've got on this screen at the moment, you've got 4 penalty takers if you include Mitrovic, and then Martinelli is that question mark 5th penalty taker. You've got Andreas, you've got Almiron, you've got Trippier, you've got lots of set piece takers and threat. Really, I would say probably the weakest individual in terms of threat would probably be Ben White, but because he's playing right back in essentially the leaders of the Premier League, there's even opportunities where he will throw in the occasional maybe assist, even goal for Arsenal. So I think, to be honest, the structure is okay as it is. It just, I think, lacks a little bit of flexibility, which is why I wouldn't necessarily pick it as my optimal draft. And the third one, there's maybe just a slight more. Of course, there's more money being spent here, which is maybe why I'm leaning towards it a little bit more, just because I always feel better when I'm using a wild card or some kind of, chip, essentially, being able to use all the money that's at my disposal. In this draft, I've got about $1 million in the bank, I think, but you'll notice that instead of Marcus Rashford, I've actually got Mason Mount in place of him. That's kind of really the first change. The second change would be Mo Salah ahead of De Bruyne. I think, again, when we talk about penalties or we talk about, from a fantasy perspective, trying to cover as many assets as possible for not only just the team perspective, but also set pieces as well, Mo Salah fits the bill perfectly, right? We know he's on set pieces, he's on penalties. Of course, he offers a tremendous amount of threat as a double up as well, I believe, with Darwin Núñez, that I think both of them, even though Liverpool maybe haven't kicked on fully in that first half of the season, I think this break would have helped individuals like Mo Salah that, didn't feature in the World Cup at all. Maybe a bit of a reset for him. I think really he's now going to kick on. That's kind of why I was leaning towards him over De Bruyne. But I absolutely can get on board with the double up of City. That's, again, no reason to not go for it. I just think that Liverpool's short-term fixtures, even without the double game weeks, this man essentially can produce big. And even if City do still double in 23, who's to say that we don't just move Mo Salah to De Bruyne in that double game week? It doesn't necessarily hurt us too much. We can plan transfers ahead. This is just essentially to target these next 3 fixtures. And of course, like I say, the game week 20 double game week for City and Spurs is not necessarily guaranteed. So maybe we shouldn't necessarily even be thinking about game week 20 and just look as far as 23, which is why Salah kind of gets the nod in this draft ahead of De Bruyne. Then we've got, like I said, Mason Mount ahead of Rashford. If you actually have a look at the fixtures, both teams, Chelsea and Manchester United, play Bournemouth and Forest in the next 3 fixtures. Of course, the benefit of having Mason Mount over Marcus Rashford is that you get 2 fixtures in game week 19 for him. So yes, it's Manchester City, a tricky fixture, and of course Fulham away, which is also maybe not necessarily as easy as the fixture ticker suggests at Craven Cottage. But I do think that Mason Mount, at 7.5 million, if you want a route into Chelsea's attack or just access essentially to their double game week, then he could be the man for the job. So absolutely can get on board with him as part of the draft as well. And of course, across all these 3 drafts, you can pretty much mix and match a lot of them. There's not too much kind of, unflexibility, let's say, or non-flexibility here. We could downgrade Mason Mount to Marcus Rashford. We could, I think, nearly then afford Darwin to maybe Harry Kane. We'd maybe have to make another move where, let's say, Andreas needs to go down to Somerville just to save an extra 0.1 here and there. Maybe Cancelo needs to be slightly reduced, but you'd probably be able to tinker around just that little bit more to reach a similar type of squad cost. Let's say 101 million, maybe 101.5. Still have Harry Kane, who's another penalty taker with a potential double in game week 20. And if you don't like Chelsea as a kind of an attacking double game week fixture, you prefer the defensive option, maybe you go for Reece James and Kepa. Maybe you take Mason Mount, like I say, for a Manchester United attacker. I just think that ultimately this draft here in front of us offers maybe a little bit more flexibility than the other 2. So by far, I think this is where my head's at at the moment in terms of favourability. I think this one is the one that I will end up going with. But of course, yeah, things change over the next few weeks. We'll see, or over the next week, should I say. 100% there'll be more tinkering and essentially more breaking down of data to be able to target the best possible teams ahead of that restart. But yeah, I think really, like I say, these are three very, very formidable structures of squads and pretty much cover all the teams that we would like to cover. So yeah, let me know in the comments below if this guide was useful for you, if you're going to use any of these drafts specifically. If you liked the guide overall, then please let me know. Of course, again, massive thank you to all of those subscribers that have stuck around and of course are watching the channel and helping it grow. Absolutely massive shout out to all you guys. I'm so happy to be back. I love, absolutely, like I say, I love creating the content for you guys. There will be a live stream on Boxing Day, of course, ahead of the restart. Like I say, I'll try and put out a couple of videos between now and then as well, with probably a team selection, maybe some more detailed breakdown and analysis of player data. But yeah, let me know in the comments if there's anything that you would like to see as well. I'm always open to suggestions, of course, on this channel. I want it to grow with you guys. I'm not just producing it for you. I want to know that it's right for you as well. So let me know. And of course, if you liked the content, then just smash that like button below. Really helps me out, guys. So once again, thanks for tuning into the video. Welcome back. Can't wait for FPL to start again next week. Massive congratulations to Argentina winning the World Cup this evening. And I will see you in another video very, very soon. Take care, guys.